Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Attendance Bias. I am your host, Brian Weinstein. If you're a regular listener of the podcast, you know the typical format, but I absolutely love it when a guest has an idea and the guest and I have to think it out a little so that the guest can tell his or her story while still keeping the familiar segments of the show intact. Today, Ryan Miners helped make that happen. Rather than choosing one specific show or jam, Ryan wanted to talk about two sequences that both involve the insane instrumental Buried Alive. The first one is Buried Alive Straight into Poor Heart from November 9th, 1996 at the Palace at Auburn Hills. The second one is Buried Alive into AC/DC Bag from August 11th, 2024 at Bethel Woods. Two Buried Alive segues roughly 28 years apart. But even though we didn't cover either entire show, there was no shortage of content for Ryan and I to cover. Between the 28-year gap of these two segues, we touched on a tremendous amount of information, not hesitating to go off on tangents where, at one point, Ryan flipped the script and he put me on the hot seat. There's something about a good fish segue that brings out the best in the audience, and Ryan was able to explain exactly what made these two so special to him. But I don't want to spoil it. Let's join Ryan Miners to talk about the Wetlands Preserve, the history of Deer Creek, and what it means to hear the line, "Thank you, Mr. Miner, when your name is so close," as we discuss segues from Buried Alive from 1996 and 2024. Ryan, welcome to Attendance Bias. How are you today?
Doing very well. How are you, sir?
I'm doing very well also. I'm glad to be off from work today. Glad to have you here. And I'm really excited for today's episode because you brought something up. You and I went back and forth a number of times over email. And when we were trying to figure out a show or a jam to listen to, you came up with an interesting and intuitive idea. Rather than pick one show or pick one jam, we're going to focus on one song and two versions of it that you've heard live. So thank you for being kind of innovative, changing things up a little bit on Attendance Bias.
Oh, absolutely. I started listening to the show and just realized how much I enjoyed it, and kind of looked at my fish history and looked at Buried Alive was the first song that I ever heard. It's also the last opener of the last set that I heard in Bethel this year. So it kind of bookended things, and I just thought it would be awesome, as it's a great song. Just very excited about it.
Me too. So for the audience's edification, the two shows/versions of Buried Alive that Ryan and I are going to speak about today. The first one is from November 9th, 1996, Buried Alive into Poor Heart. So a quick and easy segue there. But also we fast forward a number of years to August 11th, 2024, which features Buried Alive into AC/DC Bag. So same song to start a segue, completely different endings for each segue and completely different eras in the band's career. So before we get to either of those, Ryan, let's hear about you as a fan with the Attendance Bias Lightning Round.
Attendance Bias Lightning Round.
Ryan, when was your first Fish show and what do you remember about it?
First Fish show was 11/9/96, the Palace of Auburn Hills, Detroit-ish, not exactly Detroit, about 45, 50 minutes north of Detroit. Basically, what I remember is being a young, goofy kid who had no idea what he was getting into. I had been to Lollapalooza. I had been to one Dead show before I went to my first Fish show. So like the lot and things like that weren't a big surprise to me as far as seeing Shakedown. Hadn't really been involved in Shakedown, still a little young the first time I went to my Dead show. But yeah, I just remember the excitement of the evening. Driving up there. It's about an hour and a half. I'm from Toledo, Ohio, so it's about an hour and a half north to get to the Palace of Auburn Hills.
How old were you at the time?
So at the time, I had just turned 18. I graduated in the summer of 96, turned 18 after I graduated. My birthday's in June. So yeah, just turned 18. Had learned about fish from a friend in high school. It was probably early 95. We all skipped school and we ended up over at a buddy's house, and he started talking about fish, and he had some studio CDs. I think Rift was the first one we listened to. So Rift was the first song that I ever heard from Fish, that I knew of at least. And then I think Picture Nectar Hoist was the other one that we listened to. He probably skipped some songs in there. I recall Poor Heart being my favorite of the songs that we listened to, with my friend being another one that just blew my mind when I heard it. So I was relatively new to it, had a chance to listen to some live one. Not sure how much I actually dove in before I started seeing Fish. I was aware of them and all my friends started listening to them. Just remember being super excited to see the show. I think my friends were more excited than me, but I felt their excitement, and it kind of added to my excitement. So,
Well, so were you into bluegrass before?
not
What was your musical pedigree before you discovered Fish?
Yeah, so growing up, my mom was huge Eagles and Fleetwood, classic rock, Heart, things like that. So those were the things I listened to. My first show I ever went to was a Melissa Etheridge concert with my mom when I was like 11 years old. I remember having a good time. Don't remember a lot about that show, but I remember I had a good time just being with my mom. Bluegrass, not so much. I was into Zeppelin and things like that, where they touch a little bit, but nothing like Poor Heart, or like that level of bluegrass in my background. But yeah, my dad was a big Huey Lewis fan, so I had that also in my ear all the time. I never knew how right he was. He always told me that Huey was timeless, and I just realized that a few weeks ago. I was like, wow, the old man was right. It really is timeless.
I think all dads are big Huey Lewis fans. It's kind
I'm
of
not a
like,
dad.
When you reach a certain age, you either, whether or not you're actually a father, but you're old enough to be a dad, you kind of decide, am I going to start studying the Civil War or World War II? And I now love Huey Lewis all of a sudden.
Exactly. I love the Revolutionary War, so I love reading stuff on that. But
Right, you got to pick one.
yeah, exactly. But yeah, so I was, I knew music. I liked music. My first cassette tape I ever got as a kid was the Doobie Brothers, which is interesting for our show we're going to talk about today. One of them, really just a noob walking through the door, not knowing what live Fish was really all about. And it was very exciting.
Well, many years later, as of this recording, what was your most recent Fish show and what did you think about it?
Yeah, Bethel. This year, the Bethel run I thought was amazing. I know night one, set one was ranked very high when they did the rankings at the end, which it deserved every bit of that. I know some people look at that set list and they're like, well, it was like 6 openers in a row, like Fish felt, everyone speculated that the crowd was not feeling it or wasn't into it. What happened was we all had to travel through a hurricane to get there, and it was very scary. Some people flew. My buddies had to hit the runway twice and go up, and they had to land in Syracuse instead of White Plains and drive an extra hour and a half because the weather was so bad. We got stuck following the remnants of the hurricane up, so we were stuck in torrential downpours the whole time. Probably the scariest ride I've ever had, and I've had some really scary fish adventures going to shows before. But yeah, it was just, we got there and just the whole setup, all 3 nights I thought were great. The third night, where we're going to talk about Buried Alive into AC/DC Bag, by that time I told my friends after night one, I was like, we could leave now and I'd be happy. Like after set one of night one, I was like, that's what I needed right there. We could go right now, but obviously 2 more days to go. But yeah, that was my first time in Bethel. What an amazing, have you ever been to Bethel?
I was there. Yeah. I went there the first time they played there, which was Memorial Day weekend in 2011, but I haven't been back to the venue since.
I just thought it was amazing, especially thinking about the history of the venue and just the layout of it. I just thought it was a very cool place to see a show, and the vibe was just amazing as well. But yeah, what I recall is just thinking. So a couple years ago, a buddy and I, we talk a lot about Fish, and we talk about peaks, the 1.0 peak, the 2.0, the 3.0. And I think it was like 2015, 16, we started talking, all right, they're going into another peak here. And I feel like the same thing's happening again here if we're calling this 4.0 now. What I love most about 4.0 right now is that nothing was off the table this last tour. I'm one of the type of people who watches the show before, watches the set list unfold when, like, the show before the show I'm going to. You can be quite disappointed when there's a song you want to hear and you see it pop up the night before you're going to see it, or the run before you're going to see it. But this year, I didn't think they stuck to any standards as far as like trying to go no repeats, they were repeating songs. There were certain songs they just want to play that they keep tweaking and tweaking. I just think they're at an amazing point right now as far as Fish is concerned here in 24. I think, in my opinion, I think this is the best they played since probably the end of 1.0. As far as
I agree. Well, I don't know about the end of 1.0. My opinion is at least since the Baker's Dozen, but I was wondering about something you just said, and this is kind of a tangent, but that's why we have a podcast. I don't understand this expectation or this new kind of I don't know if I want to call it a rule, but this new idea that if Fish plays a song in the run before you're about to see them, that it's off the table. I've never thought that was the case. I've always thought that everything is on the table. Like once they play a new venue or a new run, it's like a complete reset. So
Mhm.
a rarity or a somewhat rarity, like Isabella, let's say, or Karina, right? If I'm
Mhm.
going to see them at Madison Square Garden and they before MSG, let's say I'm just making up stuff. Let's say they play the Palace at Auburn Hills right before it, and they play Karina. I'm not going to MSG assuming it's off the table. Is that
Mhm.
kind of the vibe that you were thinking? Is because I saw people posting about it online, like, oh, I can't believe I missed Rogue or whatever it may be.
Mhm.
I never thought that was the case. I always thought maybe night to night, like if you're seeing a Saturday and Sunday night show, but you skipped Friday and they played
Mhm.
your favorite song Friday night, then yeah, it's off the table. But
Right.
once you move venues, it's a brand new fish.
I never really felt that in the past. I always, maybe the last few years, but back to the 90s, 2000 shows, even, thinking back to like 2014-ish, I kind of felt like if they played something at a venue the night before that you weren't going to see it. But that's what I really loved about this tour here was, so the show before the Bethel show was at Van Andel, which we all know is the famous Billy Strings joint in the band. I'm a huge Billy fan, and I'm originally from that area. So the discussion was, do we want to go up and see Van Andel shows, maybe do Deer Creek and Van Andel, or do we want to try a new venue and go up to New York? And we all decided let's check out Bethel. Like obviously the history of Woodstock and things there. Like, and nothing's more exciting than going to see Fish at a new venue. I've been to Deer Creek so many times. Not that every show there isn't great, but it's just like it's old hat, but it just adds a new excitement when you're going to a new venue and checking out new things. So we made that decision, but watching those shows or paying attention to the Van Andel shows, watching them go through and obviously seeing Billy come out the first night, I was just like, I kind of knew it was going to happen too. I heard a rumor and kind of propelled it for about a week before and ended up being right. But yeah, so that just my feelings were kind of hurt. Like, they busted the Harry Hood, which is a special song to me, which we can talk about. Yeah, I was just surprised at the end of Bethel. We got, I enjoy Santos. So we got a Santos and a Hood at the end of that, which were two songs that I thought for sure would be off the table. They're not songs that I go in, like absolutely happen to see, but I've always been a bit of a finicky fan up until the last few years. I was kind of that guy, the guy who would complain about set lists
We're
and
all that
about
guy. We're
I know,
all
but I
we're all
was
finicky.
worse. Like it kind of consumed me to the point where at certain times I couldn't even enjoy shows because I'd be so upset. And I know it's foolish. And looking back on it now, I've found a whole new demeanor when it comes to Fish. Like I'm just thankful for every show I get to see from this point on, every song I get to see. But yeah, I was that guy, and sad to say, I probably let that through the teens here in 20 teens affect a lot of shows that were great shows that I couldn't enjoy because I didn't get what I wanted. But I've had some life-changing things happen, and I have a whole different outlook on life, Fish, and just everything that comes our way and the things we get to enjoy. So
All right, good.
um,
Well, today we're going to be talking about two really strong segues, right? Buried Alive into Poor Heart and Buried Alive into AC/DC Bag. But going back to the lightning round, other than those two segues, right? If we take those off the table,
mhm.
what is your favorite segue in Fish history, whether you were present for it or not?
Yeah, so a couple different ones. My favorite that I was present for was the Tweez Bella from '97 at the Palace. I had seen Isabella played by Fish before, but I don't think anybody saw that coming out of Tweezer. And just the places that went to, just an amazing song. I love any segue into Ghost most times. There's just something about coming out of a jam and hearing that low slump of like Mike's bass underneath and the drums kicking in and like as it starts to kick in, you're like, oh, Ghost, here we go.
Well, speaking of never knowing where they're going to go, since we're talking about Buried Alive today, other than Buried Alive, what is your favorite Fish opener?
I love Free. Like I've had a couple free openers that just kind of set the tone. Any Fish opener, if I can be honest. I mean, the fact that I'm
Yeah.
at a show, is what it really boils down to. We'll go with Free. I love Free. The Free second set in Cleveland 22. Second set opener was one of the best frees I've ever seen. Definitely worth a listen if nobody's ever heard it before. They take it to an exploratory place and just jam it out. It is fantastic.
What is your most controversial Fish opinion? Because you said you usually go to shows with a big group of friends. What's something you would say in conversation about Fish that other people would really strongly disagree with?
So this kind of goes back to me being that guy for a time. I don't like the fact that Trey solo songs and tab songs get counted as covers. A lot of times when I look in the morning, if I'm checking out a set list, I'll go down to the breakdown right away just to see, what era they're in that night, see what they did. And you'll see 6 covers, and then you'll look, and 4 of them will be Trey or tab songs, and you're like, wait, and there's in some cases where they don't play any other covers other than what they consider covers for Trey and tab songs. So when I complain about it, my friends tell me, they're like, well, all Fish songs are technically Trey songs. So in that case, I guess I think that all Trey songs should be considered Fish songs as well and just not counted as covers.
So when you see Gotta Jaboo on a set list or First Tube, it's a Fish song.
That's a Fish song.
Right. I agree. I thought especially that big first batch in like 99 or so when Tab first got off the ground, those were, at least the way I listened to them at the time, they were kind of like AAA for the majors of Fish.
I was just going to say it's like minor leagues, they're working out the kinks and they're bringing it up to the majors,
Well, to wrap it up, what is the weirdest thing you've ever seen at a Fish show in your 30 plus years in seeing them, or almost 30 years? I can't do the math.
Yeah, I think it's 28.
Okay.
Yeah, the craziest thing I've ever seen, and I was a little hesitant to talk about something that Fish had done. I just don't recall if some of the weirdest things, that have been talked about on the show have been about what the band has done.
Open to interpretation.
Yeah. So the weirdest thing I ever saw was the 97 Deer Creek, the second set, when they opened with Cities, went into Good Times, Bad Times. And then they had the rotation jam where Paige had the theremin. Now, remember, this is my first outdoor show that I went to. Actually, very interestingly, the first set I got separated from my friends. I had a head full of a lot of fun stuff going on that day, and turned around, all my friends were gone. And if you know anything, if you're old like me, back then we didn't have cell phones. Somebody might have had a pager, but there's no way to page anybody.
You didn't realize it, but an hour and a half elapsed between the time you were with them and the time you weren't, probably.
No, I mean, it really did, because it was like, I saw something, it was like, we were walking, I saw something like a dog seeing a squirrel. I looked, I turned around, they were gone. My mind state just wasn't in me to break it down and walk around to find them. So I was standing there very scared, and it's actually a really nice story that there was a group of 4 people sitting on the lawn, and they could see what was going on. I'm right in front of them, pacing, looking worried, probably looked like a scared, lost kid. They were like, "Do you lose your friends?" And I said, "Yeah." And they said, "Well, why don't you come?" The first set was just starting. They said, "Why don't you come watch the first set with us, and we'll help you find your friends after the first set." And so I did. I went over and sat down with them. I recall one of the times, Cars, Trucks, Buses. It was the first time I heard that, and I was like, "Oh, what is this?" I really love the instrumental jams. So I asked them. I said, "What is this?" And they were like, "Oh, this is Cars, Trucks, Buses. It's off the new album." And just very, very cool, down to earth people. Like, just took me in. I could have had the worst first outdoor experience of my life. If they hadn't pulled me in, I probably would have freaked out. Maybe never went to another outdoor show again. Who knows? No, it was great. But then going into the second set, I find my friends very emotional once I found them, and we go into the second set, and just seeing the theremin, I had no idea what it was. He's standing there making this ambient noise with his hands, and I'm just like, what's going on here? And then they start the rotation jam. At one point, I thought it was riff they were going into before the rotation started. I even looked at a buddy confidently, and I said, "They're going to play riff." And obviously I was wrong, but really I had no idea what we're going to get into. And the Rock William that's a moment that'll stick in my head forever. It was just like a traditional sounding song, but it was such evil Fish, like evil comedy throughout. I just thought it was the most amazing thing, and it just blew my mind.
Fishman's voice on that song really can take, like what you said, a standard song and make it evil. Like everything is just a little off. On Rocket William, but that's a nice feather in your cap. If you're a guy who checks the stats and the breakdown of the songs after each show, Rocket William is something that not a lot of people have seen. Off the top of my head, I'm going to guess and then fact check it later that they've only played it maybe 4 times.
I was going to say three. So,
Okay. Well, we'll find
yeah.
out. And I'm glad you found your friends.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. But yeah, I hear you always say that you've never been to Deer Creek.
I have not. Deer Creek and Alpine Valley.
Yeah, Alpine, I don't hear such good things about. I've actually never been to Alpine, surprisingly. As many of the runs I've taken through Chicago and all that, I've never actually been to Alpine. I hear the vibe in Alpine as far as law enforcement and things like that isn't exactly desirable. It's not great down in Deer Creek, but not as bad as what I hear about up in Alpine. But I definitely recommend getting to Deer Creek. Most of my best memories come from Deer Creek. Amazing shows played there, and the venue itself has changed a lot. And I've heard you talk about this in recent shows about how they've built it up around, kind of made a city where there wasn't a city. And I think that's a lot due to Fish bringing people in and creating their own cities in that town. But yeah, definitely recommend you get to Deer Creek show as soon as possible.
When was this show played?
Today we're talking about 2 shows. Again, November 9th, 96 and August 11th, 2024. But this would take a million years if we had to go into the context of each show or each date of both shows. So we're going to kind of eschew that. And let's give some context to the story, about the stories you're going to tell about maybe Buried Alive as a whole. I figured, why go all the way back to 96 and then 2024? Let's talk about Buried Alive, since that's the focus of our conversation. So a little background about the song and its history. Buried Alive debuted at the, at least in my head, famous September 13th, 1990 show at the Wetlands Preserve in New York City, down in Tribeca, although it's no longer there, unfortunately. This show is, in my opinion, legendary, because I listened to it back before the spreadsheet existed, before fish.in existed, before YouTube existed. It was just one of my treasured discs. And I remember it because I had to burn it onto a CDR when I got to college. And it was a show that the recording was not split into separate tracks. So the entire set was one recording. So I had to listen to it straight through the whole time, every time. So this show...
That's not a bad thing.
No, it's not a bad thing, especially with this set list, because this show featured not only the debut of Buried Alive, but also the first time that the band played The Landlady, Tube, the Ass Festival, which is that instrumental part that would be eventually inserted in the middle of Guela Papyrus. Strangely, the debut, and I think the only time they played Minute by Minute by the Doobie Brothers, the debut of Paul and Silas, the bluegrass cover, Megillah, Stash, and a song I had never heard before listening to the show, Going Down Slow, which I found out is a blues classic by St. Louis Jimmy Odin. And then for the encore, or at least the end of the set, they played a trio of Dude of Life songs, Self, which I think Chalk Torture would borrow from, Dahlia, and Revolution's Over, which I don't know if any of those songs would be repeated. But oddly, Buried Alive was played both during the first and second set of this show. The first part, the first debut of it, was a full version, the song we know today. And then Out of AC/DC Bag, later in the second set, they kind of jammed on it for about 45 seconds. Although on fish.in, it's listed as its own separate track. So I love this show for the banter and the chatter from Trey. He's in a very talkative mood. I've been to the Wetlands before it closed down just a few times, many years after this show was played. And it is extremely small. It is a tight venue. The capacity was maybe 300 people if you were really crammed in. And that's if you were barely able to breathe. So I would really say a comfortable capacity of maybe 200 or 250. But I was really obsessed with this disc because, like I said, Trey was talking all the time. It was a New York City show at a venue that I loved. And most valuably, in my opinion, it was available on Soundboard.
One question I did have for you, sorry to interrupt. So throughout that show, so I had never heard that show before we started talking about this. He keeps saying Captain Zero, Captain Zero. Maybe this is my novice coming out. But does that, obviously he's talking about Tom, I would think, right?
No, he's actually talking about Fishman.
Fishman, okay, yeah. So I was lost a little bit, and I just wondered if there was an association between Captain Zero and Character Zero. That was,
I I
anyway,
don't
sorry to
think
interrupt
so.
that.
No, no, no. I don't think so. I think that what he's talking about is Fishman was not abandoning, but changing up his outfit. So
Yeah,
I
I
don't
heard
know
him
if
say
he
no
was
more
already.
donuts.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, so he was already wearing the donut dress, but for this show and maybe even this tour, I don't know this specific, but at least this show, Fishman had like a very tight, like black spandex, like head to toe, almost jumpsuit with a big, if I'm remembering, I don't know if it was black or white of a color picture that I can think of, but it was a big zero on his chest that was, I think, in silver, like glitter or sequins.
Okay.
And he also had a cape, and the spandex went over his head like a hood. So he was
Okay.
kind of like featuring a like a superhero named Captain Zero. So I think Trey was introducing him under that name.
Okay. I heard him say something. He Captain Zero. He wrote all the songs. I don't know. There was a part where I assumed it was going to be Tom he was talking about.
No,
Regardless,
yeah, no, the joke
what
is
a show.
Fishman
That's
wrote
all I
all
can
the
say.
songs. But yeah, it is quite a show. And then to zero in on Buried Alive a little bit, at the time of this recording that you and I are speaking about now, it's been played 169 times, right? At this point in 2024, more than I would have guessed. I thought it was a little more of a rarity. And it's never really, when I looked at how long it's been played, it's never really been that far out of the rotation. Although I will say in 2.0, it was played only twice in the 2.0 era. One of those times was during the April 2004 Vegas run, where it was surprisingly good considering the reputation that that show and that run has.
Yeah, no,
I
I've definitely heard that. It's definitely a very nice version. I like that one as well.
That's my history with Buried Alive, but you're the guest and you chose this song. What are your general thoughts and what's your history with Buried Alive?
So I've only seen it twice. The two times we're going to talk about today, which made this very interesting. And then, so it was the first song I ever heard, first set opener I ever heard, and the last set opener that I've heard to this point. So it just kind of bookended what this conversation started out as when I started looking into it, and just made me want to do it even more. And then you brought the 91390 show into it, and I'm looking at the set list on that, and I'm blown away because it has so much personal history to me throughout this as well as all of us with Fish. But for instance, you mentioned The Landlady was debuted. I was chasing The Landlady until Atlantic City Beach in 21, which is a show I wasn't even supposed to go to. It was a last second decision. So in 21, I went to see so that was, coming out of the pandemic, obviously we all were. The first Fish show I saw after the pandemic was Deer Creek in 21, which was just, at that time, I was actually diagnosed with cancer and I hadn't shared that with anybody. And coming out of the pandemic, I just figured everybody had their own problems and didn't need to have them piled onto with things going on in my life. But going to that show, it was very anxious going to my first show after the pandemic. I had been to one Black Crow show here in Pittsburgh before I went to see Fish, but just awkward. The community feeling was not all there right away when we all got to Deer Creek. I think it really took until I think it was second or third night when they played Possum. I think it was second night when you felt everybody's chains come off and everybody was just like, screw it. If we get COVID, we get COVID. We're gonna have fun and we're gonna dance together. We're not gonna worry about separating. So after those shows, my friends were all going to Atlantic City Beach, and I had to work Friday and Saturday that weekend. Watching the shows unfold, were you in Atlantic City? Have I heard you say you've been to Atlantic City Beach?
Yeah, and I had very similar thoughts. I wasn't diagnosed with cancer, but I did have the same thought where it was kind of like everyone was in a different place in terms of their sense of how to deal with COVID. Like, are we coming out of the pandemic or are we still unsure about what's going on? There was a lot of confusion, but you didn't really know, even with your best friends, if two people were on the same page with how to deal with, with their comfort level, I guess I could say.
Mm-hmm.
I remember during that run in Atlantic City that I was wearing a mask still anytime I was indoors. And I thought it would be, just to see, because I had been vaccinated by that point, if I took my mask off, when I was going outside of the casino. I was staying at the Tropicana going toward the boardwalk. And I remember a very specific moment of walking through and smelling cigarette smoke everywhere. And just something clicked in my brain where it was like, if you're smelling cigarette smoke, then you're just smelling everything that hundreds of people have exhaled. And
Mhm.
that's all it took for me to wear my mask every single time I was indoors. At the show, I didn't. At the show, I took it
Yeah.
off. I also remember that my friends and I kind of stood pretty far back, and I loved the layout of the venue there. But I remember it being kind of a time of confusion slash uncertainty. But I was at those shows in 2021.
What an amazing run that was. So I'm watching those shows unfold. I'm not gonna have the nights right, but yeah, I think it was Saturday. The Slow Llama, and then they did the No Quarter. I'm watching it unfold, and I'm just, I had every opportunity to be there. My friends were there, chasing the Slow Llama. Still, I really want to hear a Slow Llama at some point. But yeah, I decided on Saturday night at like 7 o'clock to book a bus ticket to head to Atlantic City. The next, when I got off work, the bus was leaving at 2 a.m. in the morning. I booked this bus ticket. I go home, I pack a bag, fly out the door, head to the bus station, get on the bus. We start heading out. We get up towards Penn State. I'm leaving from Pittsburgh. We get up towards Penn State, and there was some weather going on, and there was a huge accident on a 2-lane highway going downhill. So they shut the entire highway down, sent us back 2.5 hours, which took us another hour out of our way to hit another highway to head to Atlantic City. Let's just say what was supposed to be a 5.5 hour bus ride turned into a 14.5 hour bus ride
Jesus.
with a layover in Philly. I got to Atlantic City around 3:30 in the afternoon. I actually had the bus drop me off. I saw a store on the corner. We were a little bit away from the hotel that it was going to drop us off at. And I said, "Can you just let me off here? I have to get off this bus." And the bus driver said, I know what you're saying, and opened the door and let me out. I went right in. I grabbed a 6-pack of Sour Monkey. I walked out the door. I drank one as fast as I could, walked to the hotel, met my friends. And just that scene, like that was one that I really want to get back to Atlantic City Beach. I haven't had a chance yet, but I really want to do like the full 3 days there. There were some things unnerving, like the nitro scene was just insane there, like almost disturbingly insane. But just it felt like Fish took over the boardwalk, and it was amazing. It was like our own boardwalk, it was like the Fish boardwalk. And I just will never forget. And then I get there, and the first song that comes on is the song that I've been chasing, The Landlady, and everything was all right from there. And the show was just amazing that last Sunday night. It was just great. So I'll always remember that. But everything else, like you mentioned, Guela, I love Guela. The Yas Festival is a great song. The Minute by Minute with the Doobie Brothers, when I saw that, I was like, all right, this is kind of lining up like it was supposed to happen, because like I mentioned earlier, that was my first cassette tape I ever had, was the Doobie Brothers Greatest Hits. Obviously, Buried Alive, first song I ever saw. I love Bluegrass Fish. If that doesn't come out, talking about how much I love Poor Heart, and I would kill to walk into a show and have nothing but a bluegrass, relatively mic set. Like that's always what I dream of. Ginseng, just go right on that line with bluegrass songs. They could do a whole set like that, a whole show like that, and I'd be perfectly content. So just that wetland show is something that I'm gonna wear out through fish.in for sure going forward. So
Set one.
Well, speaking about our focus for today, the first segue that we'll talk about, Buried Alive into Poor Heart from November 9th, 1996. This is from what I would assume at the time was your home venue, the Palace at Auburn Hills. We've had a number of guests choose shows or jams from the fall of 1996 tour. And I've given my spiel about how I think 1996 as a year is underrated, that it's often seen as an in-between year. But I'm going to skip that because we have a whole nother show to talk about. For context, this show was played right in the middle of a 35 show tour, this fall 96 tour, 2 nights after the famous Rupp Arena show, which I believe has been covered on Attendance Bias featuring the Rupp Gin, and right before the venue you brought up a little earlier, the Van Andel Arena in Grand Rapids, where Fish returned this past summer. Buried Alive opened this show. So you've mentioned several times one reason you picked this sequence is because it was an opener, and then went straight into Poor Heart. I gotta say, when I listened to it, I was wondering what to expect, and it was really pleasant that it was just an extremely fast, energetic opening. If you combine the time of both songs together, it's just under 5 minutes. combined. So when it comes time to pick different sequences or parts of the recording to include in this episode, I think I'm just going to include both songs
Play the whole thing.
back to back. Why not? But set the stage for us. Why did you choose this sequence out of all the shows you've seen?
So, I mean, pretty simple. First show, first song. As I mentioned, I did not know Buried Alive when I heard it the first time, or was not familiar. May have heard it, but wasn't familiar with it as a song. I did know Poor Heart very well, and that was a song I went into hoping to hear because it was one of the first songs I had heard on a CD. There's just something about when you think back on your first or your early Fish days and just how much you don't realize, looking in 28 years later now, not realizing that that was going to set up a big portion of your life. Like growing up with Fish is basically what I did. I think back to going to our first show, we were not prepared. It's a good thing it wasn't a camping venue or anything like that. I did have friends who went to Deer Creek 96. A few of my friends went to that, and that's a fantastic show too. Just going up there, not prepared, and then thinking a few years later to like when we went to Big Cypress in '99, how prepared we were, and thank God we were with everything that happened with that. Yeah, just walking up, basically kids. We were basically kids going to see a show, and luckily, like I said, we had been to a Dead show. Not the same, not the same vibe as the Fish show. Like it seemed like it was just more commercialized at the Dead show at that time, where everybody was trying to make a quick buck off everybody. Whereas the Fish show just felt like one community with one purpose, going to see one band play one incredible show, and it's, I can still remember, honestly, a lot of these memories didn't really come to the surface until I started listening to your podcast and listening to other people talk about their shows and their experiences. And obviously, I started out most comfortably by listening to the Deer Creek 97 episode that you have. Just hearing that show from somebody else's perspective, it really made me look at my experience with less bias, which kind of goes against what we're doing here. But it makes me look at things and go, I always thought that was the best version of that song that could have been played. And then I hear this version, or I hear why they think it's such a great, and it just opens your mind up, and it brings all these memories flooding in. It took me back to my first show, and I remember it was Fishman side. So in '96, it was still Fishman was way off to the right.
Yeah, it was 4 across.
Yep. And then them walking out, I love the band at that time. Obviously they've all become more styled out, especially Mike. But just watching them come out, Mike in his floppy Nike high tops with his his curly hair bouncing everywhere. Fishman in full ski goggles, in the dress. I had a poster of a live one on the wall, and when they came out, it was like, yep, I made it to the right show. These are the guys as they were walking out. But I remember we were up top, we were in the upper level, and honestly, it came out and just the drums and the keyboards on Buried Alive just took off. I was 100% in within like 10 seconds. And then the bass line drops in, then Trey's guitar comes in. And then what do you know? They do that for about 2 minutes, and then they go right into Poor Heart. And I could not have been happier at that moment. Like, one of those selfish moments where I'm like, I'm getting exactly what I want right now. And this, not knowing many years later, I would not get exactly what I wanted at a lot of shows. But yeah, you got everything in that show too, outside of that. And I felt like they came out on fire. Like they came out fire. And I don't know what had them, it just seemed like it was very high energy right from the start. I just dove into it with them. But I mean, in that show, you had everything from bluegrass to The Sloth came shortly after that. I think it was the third song. I mean, that's like a hard rocker. You had the compositions of Divided Sky after that. We had the acoustic talk. Yeah. One of my favorite parts in that too is when he tells the guy, pretty sure that's the show. He tells the guy, he's like, yeah, we played this for you. I think it was Sloth. We played this for you so you didn't have to hold your sign the whole show.
Right.
I love when they do that stuff too. Like basically, we see you, you can put it down. But yeah, and then we had a Day in the Life played in that as well, which I wasn't really too familiar with the cover aspect of Fish going into my first show, and huge Beatles fan. And they went into A Day in the Life, and the crowd just lost it, including me. Trey flubs the line. He made the bus in seconds flat. He made the bus in seconds flat in that show. So it was, he missed the grab my coat, grab my hat part. That'll always stick in my memory as well, because I turned to my buddy, I said, he screwed up the lyrics.
As happens, you would find out. If you've ever, next time you hear Cavern, you'll find that out.
Oh yeah, for sure. But yeah, just and then I got my first Harry Hood. So my last name is Miners, Miners. I didn't really put two and two together for a few years. That I always thought it'd be a different spelling as well when I did know "Thank You, Mr. Miner" from Harry Hood. But it's always fun every time Harry gets played, and I'm not at a show and my friends are there. I get the text, "Thank you, Mr. Miners," and I know immediately that they're hearing a Harry right there. So but yeah, just an amazing experience. I had no idea my vacation plans would be sealed for the next 28 years of anytime I had time. Not going to Europe. I'm going to Noblesville.
World famous.
Exactly. But yeah, just very exciting. Yeah, I loved it.
Hi, everybody. Brian here to welcome you to the set break of today's episode of Attendance Bias. First, thank you for listening. And second, just a quick reminder to tell you that even though Attendance Bias comes to you for free, it does take a lot of work and it does take quite a bit of money to keep the lights on here at production. So I just wanted to ask a small favor if you could support the podcast in any number of the following ways. If you could leave a review or a rating of it on whichever podcast app you use. If you could spread the word, telling a friend or someone you think may be interested in it about it. Or probably the most concrete way is to go to www.buymeacoffee.com/attendancebias and donate however much you can financially to help with the continuing costs of Attendance Bias. So thank you again so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the second half of today's episode.
Set 2.
Skipping ahead for the second part of our podcast today, your second choice, August 11th, 2024, this time, completely different part of the country, the Northeast, at Bethel Woods, New York. So right in the thick of the Catskill Mountains, not far from where the original Woodstock Festival was played. We talked about the venue a little bit earlier. This sequence now, again, opening with Buried Alive, but segueing not into Poor Heart, but into AC/DC Bag, which is a completely different second half of a sequence than the first part we talked about. So if I'm going to play both Buried Alive and Poor Heart all together, there's no way I could play this AC/DC Bag in totality because it's about 20 something minutes long. But this sequence opens the second set as opposed to the whole show. And this, just for context for anyone listening, this was the last show of the tour, of the summer tour, before the band's 4-night Mondegreen Festival. And to their credit, Buried Alive is similar to the version from 1996. The main difference that I noticed is that it's just maybe a tad slower, and each note is a little more pronounced, with a few grace notes here and there, which you can kind of say about Phish's sound as a whole in 2024 compared to their mid 1.0 sound total. But Buried Alive, it's not anything especially unique within the confines of the song. But like I said earlier, when you hear it, you know something big is about to happen. And that big thing is AC/DC Bag, which starts off kind of slow, but then settles in. And they get into a lead melody that Trey, I think, likes a lot because he repeats it enough for the other band members to hop on. So what were your thoughts when the second set opened with Buried Alive and then slammed into AC/DC Bag?
Well, initially, as soon as you hear the opening to Buried Alive, my brain goes, "Hell yes!" It's been 28 years since I saw this thing live. Let's go. Yeah, so that show had already been interesting with the bust out of ficus in the first set. There was 801 shows, 802, depending on who you ask. But so you had that interesting part, and I'll never forget that because the whole crowd, you could hear the murmurs as they went into it, and as it went on, and they're going, you could hear people 800, 800. 800 like so it's just kind of weird to hear that. And I've always enjoyed ficus. I hadn't thought of ficus for years. Probably it's been a long time since I listened to Ghost all the way through, or heard it on any recordings that I was listening to as well. Obviously only a few, but yeah, so that was kind of set the stage, that you kind of knew something was going to happen. And in my opinion, I haven't heard every jam, but I listened to a lot of the Summer 24 because I just think that it is an amazing, it's going to, in the annals, it's going to be talked about as a big show, especially depending on what happens in the future with Fish. But you kind of knew something special was going to happen. And that AC/DC bag, in my opinion, for just exploratory, just jamming, like just the different place, I felt like it could be considered the jam of the summer as far as what I've heard. There's some other ones. I mean, even in that same set later, we had a Life Saving Gun, which blew my mind. I didn't know if I liked Life Saving Gun until I saw this version of it. So
I didn't know if I liked Life Saving Gun until the New Year's run in 2023. There's a version, I think it was on the 30th, that just blew me away. And like all new Fish songs, when they are new, it just takes one version and you're in.
Yeah.
But I want to focus a little bit on this AC/DC bag. They have that, they start, like I said, with that kind of bouncy start with Trey's melody. And then at about 5 minutes and 50 seconds, the change is very obvious. They slide into a minor key and it does become Dark Fish. And Page is using whatever synthesizer he's using, and it's amazing. But then about a minute or 2 minutes later, it goes back to like bouncy playing with, the only word I can think of is a squiggly fun guitar line before going to type 2 at 10 minutes. I mean, this was all over the place, this AC/DC bag.
You didn't, like you said, it kind of just started out, nothing. You didn't think it was going to be something to write home about, but as it continued and as we got to like the 15, 17, like it just opens up into just this jam. And there's certain songs, and one of the things I thought about mentioning is the weirdest thing that I've ever seen is how people all the time will turn to me at Fish shows and they'll go, "What song is this? What song are we listening to?" Like, there's no other band really except maybe the Dad or possibly King Giz or Goose, who are starting to do that stuff now, where you would be 15, 20 minutes into a song and you go, "What song is this again?" But that's kind of for a minute there around like the 13, 14 minute part, it was kind of like, oh wait, where are we at? And then they just go into this huge rock jam. and it just takes over. And then yeah, I just remember thinking this is about 12 minutes in, I was like, oh yeah, this is going to be a special bag for sure.
Yeah, the word rock got used a lot when I was listening and kind of taking my notes. Yeah, I wrote kind of what you said, that Fishman is rocking out at about 12 minutes. And then at 14, I wrote, this has become the stuff that Fish Arena rock dreams are made of.
Yeah, that ACDC bag could sum up everything I would want in a Fish song. Like they just go all over. We all looked at each other afterwards and we were like, that was special. That was special right there. So yeah, I love the Bethel shows. They're gonna, stick in my memory for a long time for personal reasons and just playing reasons as well. I just thought the band was on fire this entire summer.
Well, Ryan, thank you for coming on to Attendance Bias to share so much. We really covered a lot of ground today. We were all over the timeline and all over the map of the USA, really, talking about 1990, 1996, 2024, everywhere in between. I think the Baker's Dozen got a mention in there somewhere.
Absolutely.
So we are really ripping open the time-space continuum as it relates to the Fish experience, but specifically focusing on the two experiences of Buried Alive into Poor Heart from 96 and then Buried Alive into AC/DC Bag from 2024. So I haven't really had an episode quite like this. So thank you for tearing me out of my comfort zone, but also especially for sharing your experience.
Oh, absolutely. I appreciate you having me on. One last thing before we end this, just wanted to ask a couple questions that maybe you've covered that I haven't gotten to the podcast yet, but maybe that you haven't. First question is, if you could pick one cover, whether it's been played before or not played before, for you to hear on a show, what would that be?
It's an easy cop out, but I thought of it before it became cool. I want to hear them play Eminence Front by The Who.
And Free, we were talking about Free earlier, and I saw occasionally you see that it says teased Eminence Fronts, but I think Eminence Front is teased in every single Free that gets played at one point or another.
That part where they do the do like that, where Mike starts his bass solos, that is a perfect opportunity, but I could see how a lot of people can hear Eminence Front there. And I'm not a big fan of post Keith Moon Who, but I don't really consider that The Who from my soapbox. There are good songs written there. It's almost more like a Pete Townsend solo band in a way. Yeah, it is. And he takes the lead vocals on Eminence Front. It's a rare Who song that was a hit that Roger Daltrey, I don't know if he doesn't sing at all, but it's not his song. He doesn't have ownership of it in performance, but it is a Who song, and it just begs to be covered by Fish. I would think, especially now in their style of playing, which is a little more laid back, a little more slow, and a little bit more contained than used to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Great answer. I could have went with that. I would love to hear them play Supertramp, Goodbye Stranger. I think that just fits right in. My buddy, I asked him this question, and he wanted me to mention that he doesn't understand why Fish has never played Nights on Broadway by the Bee Gees. And he really wants that out there. So I agree 100% with that. That's one of my favorite songs of all time. Lastly, I have a feeling this has come up before, but if you had to pick a favorite studio album, which one of the studios would be your favorite?
Oh, well, to me, this is kind of a split answer. My personal sort of if attendance bias applied to studio albums, where I kind of know it's not the best, but it's my favorite, A Picture of Nectar for sentimental reasons. That's the one that got me immediately. And I have talked about that a bit on this podcast. But as far as well-rounded albums that I would say to someone in 2024, hey, give this album a listen, you might want to come to a show. I think Sigma Oasis has been passed over by a lot of fans as just a bonus that happened in the early-ish days of the pandemic. I think it's a really solid, coherent, and well-mixed album. I think Sigma Oasis is their best album since Billy Breathes.
Yeah, mine would be Billy Breathes, so I was going to mention that, but yeah, no, definitely. Evolve is even slowly but surely growing on. So we'll get there. It takes me a few years with some of the songs off the studios, and maybe to hear it live once or twice before I fall in love. Pillow Jets. Pillow Jets was another one in Bethel that blew me away, and I had heard it once before in Pittsburgh, and I don't know if it was my mental or what, but it just didn't grab me right away. other than it being utterly too loud. The only time I ever want to put earplugs in was during those two pillow jets, because there's just something about that tone that just hits my ears wild. So, but yeah, just some questions that I had that as I'm listening to the podcast come up in my mind. So I'm glad that you took the time to answer those for me.
No, I appreciate it. It's always fun being the guest.
Yeah, I'll take you through the steps one day if we ever get a chance.
Right.
But no, it's been a real pleasure. Yeah, if there's ever an opportunity for us to do this again, if there's a show you want to talk about, or you're want to find out if somebody was at that show or had feelings on it, I'd be more than happy to come back on with you.
Well, thank you, Ryan. I appreciate everything, your time, your memories, your stories. I appreciate it all. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Brian.
A 28-year gap between sequences and dozens of tangents and rabbit holes. We got to make sure we got everything right.
Attendance bias fact check.
Ryan mentions the famous segue of Tweezer into Isabella as one of his favorite segues ever performed by Fish. That sequence was played on December 7th, 1997 at the Palace at Auburn Hills. That segue specifically has been covered on this podcast with an extensive episode with guest and friend of the pod, Bill Statler. When describing the weirdest thing he's ever seen at a Fish show, Ryan talks about the second set of Deer Creek 97. That show was on August 10th, 1997. And as Ryan mentioned, the set list for that second set was Cities, into Good Times, Bad Times, into a rotation jam with Paige on a theremin, into Rocka-William, and ended with David Bowie. Odd stuff, to be sure. And to double check, as of the time of this recording, Rocka-William has been played 5 times, all in the 1997 calendar year. I'm pretty sure I've looked this up in a previous episode, but the capacity for the Wetlands was 500, according to a website called RemiC.com. That may be true according to maybe a paid-off fire marshal or some official measuring stick, but I gotta tell you, it felt like 500 people would bust the place wide open when you were there. Blues Traveler frontman John Popper used to refer to the venue as the Sweatlands. Ryan and I spent a good amount of time talking about that famous Wetlands show from September 1990. Minute by Minute by the Doobie Brothers was apparently played twice more that fall. As far as the Dude of Life songs, Self would be played 4 more times throughout the early 90s, Dahlia would not be repeated, and neither would Revolution's Over. Regarding my description of Fishman's Captain Zero outfit, I think I was pretty accurate, except that the big zero on his chest was in red, not silver. Ryan wanted to make sure that I included the fact that, although he was diagnosed with cancer in 2021, at the time of this recording, he has been cancer-free for 2 years. The November 7th, 1996 show at the Rupp Arena has been covered on Attendance Bias with guest and friend of the pod, Chris Coey. And that's it for today's episode. I'd like to thank Ryan Miners for joining me today, Fish.net for its help with the fact check, as well as the Mockingbird Foundation for their help with music education for children, and Fish.in for the recording used in today's episode. If you enjoy Attendance Bias, please support the show by visiting www.buymeacoffee.com/attendancebias and donating anything you can. Every penny helps. Thank you again so much for listening, and I'll see you next time on Attendance Bias.